national water grid, we can channelize, we can divert the water from the surplus water areas, rivers, towards the areas which are deficient in water. This way we are going to solve the problem of water scarcity and dependence on monsoon also for agricultural purpose. Now let us talk about the earthquake in Nepal. That is the second case. Now the earthquake in Nepal, which came in 2015, was one of the very devastating earthquakes which was seen in Asia in the recent times. Now what is an earthquake? Actually, an earthquake, it is a tremor or a shaking of the surface of the earth due to sudden release of energy because of tectonic movements or volcanic activities. Now to understand that, I explained this in the last chapter also on FreeCO app while I was discussing with chapter number 7. Now the structure of the earth is, this is the core which is in the solid form. We have the mantle, part of the mantle is in the molten form, what we call it as asthenosphere, and above the asthenosphere we have the lithosphere or the crust. This crust is actually floating on the asthenosphere. Now this crust comprises of two different types of parts. One is the oceanic crust and the other one is continental crust. Alright, and they form the different plates and they are sliding on the mantle, that is asthenosphere. Now due to collision, these are huge masses, a huge quantity of energy is released which causes the tremor and the shaking on the surface of the earth, what we call it as earthquake. Now the seismic waves, these seismic waves, the earthquake waves, they are very strong and powerful and they can cause a lot of things, like they can cause deep cracks on the surface of the earth, they can change the entire relief on the surface of the earth, means new mountains can be formed, plateaus can be formed, the existing ones can be wiped away also. Apart from this, collapse of buildings, monuments, bridges, roads, all these things, they all occur, they are caused because of the earthquakes. Now talking about the earthquake which occurred in March, in April 2015 in Nepal, although Nepal, there are various reasons for it, I'll tell you, but before that let me tell you that from March to December in 2004, there were a series of earthquakes, but the magnitude of these earthquakes was not very intense or very high. It all ranged between 4 to 6 on the Richter scale. They had a magnitude of 4 to 6. Because we use an instrument to measure the intensity, the magnitude of the earthquake, that is known as Richter scale. Now, it was not very powerful earthquakes which occurred during that time, but there was a warning. There was a warning giving that since this entire mountainous state of Nepal, it lies on Indus-Yarlung zone. Indus-Yarlung zone, which stretches along the entire Himalayan and it's the most seismically active zone of the earth. Like over here you must have seen say we have the Pami Knot here, the Himalayas, they run from here up to Arunachal this way. So this entire zone from Indus, we call it as Indus-Yarlung zone. So Nepal is situated on this. The first reason for the earthquake which came in Nepal was the location of Nepal. Since Nepal is located on the Himalayan mountains and two tectonic plates, they meet beneath the Himalayas, which has a fault line. Alright? Now this Indian plate, the lower part of India, what you see like this, it's actually pushing, the Indian plate is pushing against the Eurasian plate. Even the Himalayas have been formed because of this plate tectonic movement. Millions of years back, when first there must have been a collision between the Indian plate and the Eurasian plate, the first range of Himalayas must have come into existence. Again, after say a long time, when there must have been a very powerful collision between the two plates, the second range, what we call it as Middle Himalayas, that must have come into existence, giving rise to the previous one. And likewise, the third powerful collision must have occurred, resulting into the formation of the third range, the Lower Himalayas or the Outer Himalayas. and the previous two, they must have gained in height. So actually this region is already lying on a fault zone. So Nepal is located on a fault zone which is very prone to earthquakes. Now geology, the very geology of this country, in the recent years, the urbanization, unplanned urbanization, and the architecture of the country also played an important role in this occurrence of the earthquake in Nepal. Now, what were the effects? As I told you, in every earthquake, there is a lot of loss of life and property. The same way, loss of life, let me tell you that on April 25th in 2005, a very severe, very powerful earthquake occurred in Nepal. It was very close to Kathmandu and Pokhara, in between these two places. It had a magnitude of 7.8 on the Richter scale. And the seismic focus is what? The place of origin of the earthquake. It is considered to be just 7 miles underneath the surface. If a seismic focus is shallow or shallower, the destructive impact of the waves is much more higher. So it's considered to be a shallower one, and because of that it had very powerful waves, seismic waves. The seismic waves, the earthquake waves were felt in China, it was also felt in India and Bangladesh. Alright, so it caused a lot of destruction in that area. Not only this, after this major earthquake there were 240 aftershocks. Aftershocks means the minor earthquake which keep on following, means after the major earthquake, less powerful earthquakes, the shaking of the tremor that we feel, which goes on for continuous, it can be for many days, even months also. So that aftershock, there were 240 aftershocks after this, after the major earthquake. So these are the reasons why. So the effect of the earthquake resulted into loss of life and property. Over 9,000 people were killed, means all across, and over 22,000 were injured. Although this death toll would have been much more higher in the rural areas, especially in the countryside, in the villages, since the people, when the earthquake occurred, most of the people were outdoors. They were working outside in the field, so they were not trapped in their houses. Otherwise the death toll would have been much more higher. This is one advantage, since they were working outside, outdoors, they were not inside the house. Apart from this, many ancient buildings and heritage sites, they all were destroyed during this earthquake. Not only this, it also triggered an avalanche on Mount Everest and caused the death of 19 climbers. Avalanche is what? Huge mass of snow when it rolls down the slopes of the mountain. Tons and tons of snow when it starts rolling down at a high speed, that is known as avalanche. So it triggered an avalanche on Mount Everest, and 13 unfortunate climbers were there who lost their lives. So these are some effects of the earthquake in Nepal. Although worldwide means India, China, they were the first countries along with the other countries to provide aid, send aid and relief teams. Although a lot of countries, they sent help, rescue teams, but the relief work was complicated because there was overcrowding. Nepal is basically a tourist country, and the tourists who all were there, tourism is one of the biggest industries of Nepal. They all, because it created a havoc, there was a turmoil all over, and due to the debris which was scattered at all places, the movement was badly affected. So the rescue teams, it was very difficult for them to reach to the last person who needed the help. So although somehow or the other, still the government is trying, other non-governmental agencies, they are also trying to bring back the conditions of the country to the normalcy. Now the third case is the oil spill in coastal areas of USA. Now what is this oil spill? An oil spill, it is the release of liquid petroleum hydrocarbon into the environment. Basically, or especially rather, I should say, the marine ecosystem. Due to human activities, now if there is a release or spill or say somehow or the other crude form of petroleum is released in the water, that is known as oil spill. In simple words we can say. This crude oil is very valuable energy resource, and it is very unevenly distributed all over the world. It's not available in all countries. So what happens, those countries where we have the crude oil, the other countries, they import it. Now this crude oil has to be transported to the other countries, either through large vessels or through pipelines. Now the major cause for the oil spills are, first thing, accidents by oil tankers, barges or pipelines. If there are accidents, naturally there will be oil spill. Release of crude oil from the tankers, offshore platforms, drilling rigs or the wells. If there is any leakage, any release of crude oil from these sources, means from the tankers or from the offshore platforms or the drilling rigs or the wells, that also leads to oil spill in the water. Natural disasters like cyclones and hurricanes, these are very powerful storms, and these storms, they can destroy many things. That can also cause the oil spill. Other than this, if there is equipment breakdown, technical faults are there, that can also cause oil spill. Other than this, human negligence and carelessness, that is also a reason. And deliberate acts of terrorist countries at war, or vandals or illegal dumpers, they are also people, they are also a reason for oil spill in the marine ecosystem. Now there are two terms in the book related to oil spill. Let me explain you that. First is slick. What do you mean by slick? When the crude oil or the petroleum product oil is released on the water, since oil is lighter than the water, a very thin layer of floating oil is spread out on the water. Like this is the surface of the water, a very thin layer is spread all over the water. This is known as slick. Now this slick, if it's further spreaded on a large area of water, a very thin layer is formed, which is very bright and shiny like a rainbow, which shines like a rainbow. We call it as sheen. So these two terms you should remember. Slick is what? When a thin layer of oil floats over the water, on the surface of the water, that is known as slick. And the same slick, when it spreads over a large water volume of large mass of water, a very thin layer which is very shiny like a rainbow, it shines like a rainbow, we call it as sheen. Now amongst the oil spill in USA, the oil spill in the year 2010, which is deep water horizon well, which blew out in the Gulf of Mexico, is considered to be one of the most